My presentation is on self-assessment as a path to greater student self-efficacy without increasing instructor labor hours. The exigency for this seems obvious. We as instructors are overburdened almost universally, but especially those who work adjunct positions, and our students are not receiving our feedback in a way that allows them to apply it usefully to their day-to-day writing projects and their bigger final projects. Self-assessment is a way of getting the students to look at the grading criteria and look at their own project, compare the two, see what's missing, and then revise their work according to what they see missing. And the really cool thing about self-assessment that I've found through this research is that pretty consistently, once students are trained on self-assessment, they can accurately give themselves a grade on a rubric, one that reflects the instructor's grade on that rubric. So many of you might be wondering how this is different, meaningfully different from peer review. Peer review has some pretty significant limitations as found by Alemdag and Narcisse. They have some social limitations where students don't want to give honest feedback because they risk their social standing in the class, but also because peer review requires students to have their peers work in front of them, whereas a variety of scholars have found that what students really need is a really good example. So high achieving students in peer review are frequently looking at examples that are worse than their own work, and that this leads them to actually self-assess less well and to be able to revise less well. So everyone, high achieving, low achieving, everyone in between, needs a good example to look at, and peer review only provides them with a variety of examples, which sometimes is better and sometimes is worse. So what I suggest is an example review where the instructor pulls an example from previous classes, from the internet, from their own brain, from this specific project that they're working on, so that students can look at what is a really good example, notably not perfect, but a really good example, assess that themselves, and then have that as something to look back on to create their own work from. So the learning goals of my curriculum is that students will be able to determine what makes a successful version of the document they're trying to create, and then determine what they need to do to their current version of their document to make it like that successful version. So the first thing we'll have to do is train these students on the example document. So they'll all be given an example document or multiple example documents and the rubric. And the rubric will be the same for the self-assessment and for the example assessment, just the pronouns will be changed. So in the self-assessment, it will say, I did, I will, whatever. And in the example, it will say, they did, they will, whatever. And so students will have this example. The instructor will talk to them about grading criteria, about the rubric, will explain the different parts of the rubric, why they're important, how they connect to learning objectives, etc. Then the students will self-assess themselves on their rough draft. This is important because self-assessing on a final draft only gives them the opportunity to improve their writing on their next assignment, whereas getting them to self-assess on the rough draft gives them feedback at a crucial point in the writing process that the instructor is often too overburdened to provide feedback for. And so they'll be able to give themselves this rubric assessment, determine where they need to work on revisions, and then go and work on those revisions before the final draft. Then once they're revising in this curricula, they'll have not only the rubric to work with, but they'll also have some standard revision techniques like the ARMS, CUPS, and the K-12 3 stars and a wish, which will allow them to take what they learned from their rubric, which is what they're missing, and translate it into the specific examples of what needs to be changed or what is lacking or what needs to be moved, added, whatever. And then they'll have the opportunity to revise, create their final draft, and then importantly, they'll be given a reflection worksheet, which will not only get them to reflect on what they could improve on in their own writing, but we'll also get them to reflect on what the instructor can improve on. So this also reduces instructor labor. So not only in the rough draft, we as instructors will only have to confirm or deny that their self-assessment was accurate, but also in this part, we won't have to do the guesswork of wondering whether this is working for the students or what we could change to make it better. Every time they give their reflection, they will also be giving us feedback. I understand that this is probably not going to be popular right away with the students. Several studies indicated that peer review and self-assessment can be something that students are quite resistant to. But it also creates such an increased self-efficacy in students that it is pretty likely that after students do it 4 times in a semester, they will start to realize its value, especially as the instructor starts to implement the students' feedback in the instructional design, increasing their autonomy and their confidence. Thanks for listening.